how do you overcome those fears that we talked about last week of walking into a dance studio, doing something new, and the things that keep us from being successful. I'm Maren Oslak, and this is Q&A with Heart and Soul Dance. We got such a great response from last week's episode that I wanted to follow it up because there were some questions around, okay, so that was great information, and what do you do? How do you deal with it? I do have some tools, and so I figured I would share them with you, and who knows, maybe we'll get some input from you guys too. I would love to do that. So let's address this. I think of it in 3 steps. First, you have to acknowledge that there is an issue, right? You have to actually recognize that you're in fear. And so often we don't do that, right? We just make an excuse for ourselves or walk away or justify something. I know for myself, the other night, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go out or not. And I noticed that I was starting to feel anxious, and I was going to justify it and just say, you know what, I just don't feel like it tonight. And then I realized, no, I'm nervous. Right there, acknowledge. Once you acknowledge something, now you're in choice around it. Until you acknowledge it, you're not in choice. So I didn't end up going out the other night. And what I noticed was that I did it because I chose to. I got to actually make that choice for myself instead of letting fear dictate my life. So that's first, acknowledgement. Secondly, is choice. I have to make a choice, right? And all right, let's use the analogy of compost. Here's where what I do with this is I think about laying down my fear literally like a layer of compost. So I'm an avid gardener, and I compost all year long. And I take my kitchen scraps and everything that's left over in my kitchen, not everything, but most things are left over in my kitchen, and it goes out into my garden. It creates better soil that creates better plants and then feeds me for that next season. And when I do this with my fear, it's exactly the same thing. I take something, I've acknowledged it, and I put it as a layer inside of me, and I go, okay, that's gonna be compost for me. I recognize, remember last week we said that my friend Stephanie, she's got an acronym for fear, false evidence appearing real. And when I take that and I recognize that's not who I am, it's some false evidence outside of me. Now I can actually use that to decide what I want to do going forward. Instead of being controlled by it, it becomes food for me. And that actually leads me to the third thing that I do. So the third thing, I will say that most of the work is in acknowledging it and making the decision. You're 90% of the way there. And sometimes you need that little bit of a push or a kick, right? And this actually helps me with the decision part. So this 2 and 3 are kind of connected. So the third thing that I do is I use my imagination. So I step into future Maren. I put myself normally about 2 weeks into the future, maybe a month, not so far that I can't imagine what it would be like. So if I'm doing something new, if I'm stepping into a dance studio for the first time or stepping into whatever for the first time, it's hard to imagine what I will be like at that in a year. Like, so much can change in a year, as we found last year. Wow. But anyway, so like 2 weeks, a month, even a week, right? So I imagine myself a week from today or 2 weeks from today, having made the decision to actually pursue dance, to go for it, to show up and be vulnerable and say, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm going to step into it anyway, right? And then I also imagine myself not having done it. I take that word too. I dive into who will I be if I didn't step into the dance studio, if I chose not to, if I let my fear take over, or maybe I just make that choice, right? I've stepped out of the fear and I make the choice. Okay, I'm going to choose not to, I'm going to choose to, right? And I take myself down both of those paths. And it's not just oh, let me think about that. I actually really go inside, I take some deep breaths, and I full on visualize it. I use my imagination and I step into it. So as an aside, I just recently, last week, heard that we are moving from the age of information to the age of imagination. That things are changing so quickly. Our tools from our past are not serving us anymore. That we have to be able to imagine how things will be in the future and draw them to us. And when I heard that, I thought, this is the tool that I use. And it's so helpful, because if you can't see yourself doing something, it's really hard to actually then do it, right? When we can picture something in our mind's eye, that's what allows us to step into it, to truly actually be able to do it. And once you can do that, when you can picture yourself, it's easy to picture ourselves not doing something that we haven't done yet, because that's our life, right? It's just another week for me. If I can then shift that and imagine myself in a week or in 2 weeks having done that, now that fear, it can go away completely. It has completely become compost for that future version of me. And as I mentioned with going out the other night, sometimes I choose not to, and it's okay. I got to choose. It wasn't the anxiousness that was speaking for me. It was me speaking. I know for myself, most of the time I choose to, because I really like continuing to challenge myself and grow. And there are times where I realize that I'm actually running from a little bit of inner and being quiet and alone. And so I push myself, and that's actually the fear that's pushing me out, right? So it can go either way. It doesn't have to be outward is good and inward is bad. There are no goods or bads. It's all just feedback, right? So it's what's the feedback? Where are you in your life? And you can't make that decision. You can't even go there until you've done that first thing of first acknowledge, right? So our steps, once again, acknowledge, choose, envision, right? And really choosing and envisioning are kind of interrelated. I guess you could choose to envision. So those are my tips and tricks. And just so you know, every dancer that's out there has stepped into a dance studio for the first time. I did it many years ago. Now I own a dance studio. And everyone, so I'm even thinking of my student Harrison, who's 5 years old when he started with me, and now he's 18, 19. He's probably 19 now. Oh my goodness, time flies. But even as a 5-year-old, there were nerves going on there. He was a nervous young man when he first stepped in. And so he got to hold his mom's hand when he walked in, right? And he's actually the one who brought his mom in. She might have had some nerves going on. So everyone experiences it. It's not an easy thing to do. And if you can get to that place where you make that decision from choice, Not because you should or because you shouldn't, because I have to, because you're nervous, because of all of the inner mind chatter. But you're doing it for you. Then it becomes a fun and joyous adventure. So until next week, remember, you can submit your questions, your comments, or even your solutions to how you overcome some fears. We would love to hear from you. This is Q&A with Heart and Soul Dance. See you next week.